It's recording then, yes?
Yes, yes.
Well, good afternoon, my friends. As
Eh,
Julius have explained to you, I will not be able to join you in the meeting itself. So we decided to, because I have a family thing to attend at the same time. So we thought to advance the preparation of our meeting to the morning here in Europe, and then that's why I am initiating this sort of discussion. I want to first, I hope that you are all keeping well and you are keeping up with the plans that you have for the development of the preparations of our forum in the place and scale that you have in mind. I don't have lots of very interesting information today, but there are two or three things that is worth discussing. I will invite you to watch if you have the time. It will be it will be in the evening, I think, sometime 6 or 7. So still not extremely late for you to attend. There is a presentation of the World Center of Humanist Studies in Latin America that I participate with, and where they have a lady called Maali Ketake, and she is from the Dominican Republic originally, but she studied her anthropology and other studies in the United States. So she speaks, I am told, fluent English, and you will be able to listen direct to her. But I intend anyway to participate in that meeting in order to provide a backup if required at any point of her explanations. This is in my phone, the picture that I have. This is her look. And I don't know her personally, but I will get acquainted with her on Saturday the 13th. She is going to talk about Bantu and the Kemet. Kemet is the ancient name of Egypt, I am told. And she will explain how you can trace the African cultures to that ancient times in Egypt. That is the point of origin of, we are talking of 300,000 years back or something about that. So much earlier than any other cultures, even the ancient cultures that we have heard of. That they are even the Egyptian culture, as the part that we recollect today, is about 4 or 5,000 years of age. The ancient Chinese cultures are also about 5,000 years. Then in the Middle East, the cultures that gave origin to Israel and Babylon and later on they are the origin of the uh, Greek and Latin cultures are much more recent, 2,500, 3,000 years of time. So it's quite interesting, this sort of chronological placement of the origin of the African culture at that such far away time. I suppose that she will be able to mention the facts that justify her thinking. And from Africa later on, it evolved or spread out into all the different cultures in the world. That's the theory. We'll have to see. What anthropologists have been able to prove, anyway, is that the oldest traces of the first individuals that are standing and walking, that they are called the hominids in the process of evolution of our species, were found in Africa. And about 1 million to 2 million years ago. So that seems to give evidence of why is the first cultural center that evolved in terms of developing the human culture. Quite interesting sort of stuff. And I will put a poster, or Julius will do, on our lists in a couple of days' time. So you will have the links to access by Zoom, and you will have a small brief of what will be the topic, and will be quite interesting to participate in that. We are saying that because we want to increase the exchange of interesting information, formative or training information that will be of interest to you all, is what we have been talking also before, of producing small videos and exchanging cultural information or study information or workshops that can help everybody to move into different levels of knowledge, of understanding, not only of humanism, but also what are the things that the humanists all over the world are developing in terms of promoting the basis of a new, more humane culture that we'll hope will have in the years to come a very strong influence in the world, because things are going so badly and there's so much violence and contradictions and wars, and nobody seems to be able to understand one another, that obviously we have to emphasize new principles, new values, new ethics, new fundamental rights that have to regulate a more humane society in the future. That is what we call the 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 uh, the global nation, the 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 humanist global nation. In Spanish is la nación humana universal, the human global nation, because it will have definitely the characteristics of these values that we are emphasizing in our discussions and in our teachings.
The universal human nation
Exactly.
is the English word.
Word. Exactly. That's correct.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Please.
Uh, Thank you,
Uh,
Julius. And then also I want to tell you that we are looking for educational materials, teaching materials, especially for children. Our friends in South America, they are more developed in that regard, and they have published materials, teaching materials for children that they are used in lots of schools of the educational system. For example, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Chile, in Argentina. We are getting hold of some of the files of some of these books, what we feel could be more appropriate to apply in those who are starting educational projects there in Africa. I think in Zambia, Miniver has had a school with some of the members of a family, and they have around 40 students, and they teach them not only basic skills, but they teach them to read and write, and they teach them some of the techniques that the humanists use in the work in personal development. Children many times of 6 to 13, 14 years old. You know how at a village level you cannot be too choosy or too exquisite about the exact age or conditions of the children that you are teaching to. It's some people who couldn't go to the local schools or whatever, they are in the village for different reasons, participate in the school, and they are always gaining and benefiting from it.
just
I
to
remember
add,
when I was a student in my last year of school, secondary school. There was a priest in my school that, as a charitable project, he himself had formed a school of education for children that they are very poor or that they had to work supporting the families during the day, and they couldn't attend formal studies. And they were coming into the school, and I was capable of speaking some English at the time. So I taught them English. And we had a fantastic time. We started at 8 in the evening and we went on until 10 o'clock. So it's fairly late. And we had a group of young boys and girls who yeah, they manage in the end to have little conversations about basic things, to know the names of all the things that we had in the room, etc. But basically, it was the human contact and the fun that we had doing these type of things. And I have saw that experience, and it was so rewarding. And I am sure that for them also was very positive, because when I had to go to university and I couldn't continue with that, they were very sad without that. That I was told, and that's what they told me. And maybe I don't know how they have evolved after all these years, but I am sure that the good actions that you project into other people, sooner or later they transform in something positive for them. Maybe some of them have qualified a lot later on, and they are teaching also other people who cannot have access to education.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the actions that we initiate, they multiply in manners that is impossible to anticipate.
yes,
But again, talking of these matters of education, other than providing these useful materials that you will be able to adapt or use depending on what are the conditions, I expect also other people to reply from other countries of Latin America. So I hope to have a small margin of choice for people to see. We have to put them in English. Having the files is not that difficult with the automatic translators, and I can correct the copy, so will be more or less decent. And you will have the file, so you will have to choose what are the things that you want to print out for use with them, and eventually can be printed or reproduced if we need to have greater quantity.
yes. That's very good. Then I want to ask you, Antonio, what is new in the development that you have started to tell us about this emerging BRICS BRICS development of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa that have started to work consciously for 20 years now towards a more peaceful world where people nations start to live peacefully together instead of the hegemony that we
Yeah.
have had. So, can you tell us something about what is happening in that respect?
Yes, we of course are supporting through Presenza, our news agency, of all the progressive causes in humanity, what it goes in the direction of humanization. We think that the forces that create violence in the world, the states that create violence, have been, since the Second World War, fundamentally the Western countries, the European countries, the colonizers and the people who dominated and exploited Africa for hundreds of years, and also, obviously, the United States. In that sense, today, Europe, and since the Second World War, are the minions of the United States. They have to do what they are told. The United States kept armies, permanent armies, after the Second World War, that, by the way, was won by the Russians, because it's when Hitler tried to invade Russia that then the whole people of Russia got organized. They already had a communist state there, and they developed the Red Army that were so fierce and so well equipped with the weapons that they themselves manufactured in Russia that they destroyed all the Nazi troops and they pushed them back into Germany, and they took over Berlin. And at that point, Hitler suicided himself, and all the hierarchy of the Nazis, I mean, disappeared or were decimated or they were put in jail. And the Americans haven't reached, the Europeans haven't reached Berlin or Germany at the time. They came back, they disembarked in Normandy because they were all stationed here in UK, and it took them time to advance until Germany. But by then, the Russians have already controlled a good section of Germany. And then another contingent of Americans came from Italy because they had disembarked in Sicily, and little by little they were neutralizing the Nazi troops in Italy. But they were not a huge contingent. So really the brunt of the control of the Nazi phenomena were the Russians. But they had made an agreement with Americans that they would stop in a certain location in Berlin. And so at that point, the troops waited, the German, the Red Army, and they waited until the Allies came little by little to the same point, and they occupied the rest of it. So they divided Germany. One part of Berlin and other parts of Germany were under Russian control, and the rest was divided by England, America, and France. They had different sections of the rest. And the other countries in Western Europe were liberated. And since then, the United States, because Europe was so weakened by the invasion of the Nazis that have taken control of everything. In a blitzkrieg, when they declared the war in 1939, they took all the Central European states like Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia, etc., and they started to move west. They took France in 15 days. And the French have a system of defense that they call the Maginot Lines, etc. But they rolled them over. They came with planes, etc. And the only thing that was left was Italy. Of course, they took control because it was under Mussolini, that was again an ally of Hitler, that was fascist. And the other smaller countries in the middle, they were all taken. I mean, from Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, and Holland and Belgium, etc., all the rest of it. And then they made the French, Pétain, made an agreement with them. I said, well, don't take it by violent means because you will destroy our ancient cities, etc., etc. So they made an agreement. They surrendered and they stayed there. And Spain and Portugal, they had also fascist governments at the time that were allies of Hitler. So, well, but I am telling you this story to understand how, after the war, Americans took control of everything because they hadn't fight too much, only those little bits. They were stationed in England. They sold all the weapons to the United Kingdom and all the allies, and they were living far away in the country that is the other side of the Atlantic. So they were not invaded. They didn't involve too many soldiers in the war. In Europe, I think they had casualties like 100 or 200,000 maximum, where all the others had much higher figures. And the Russians lost in all in terms of population, the people that died of starvation, that died of cold weather, that died of confrontations, military confrontation with the Germans. They lost 27 million people. So if you tell me who had to sacrifice in their own blood and the blood of the nation in order to overcome and defeat Nazism, were the Russians fundamentally. But the way that they have told history later on, the Westerners, is as if they have done everything. They never talk about Russia, and that really they won the war. So they seems to be the heroes of our history and of our everything, and it's a big lie. It's a distortion of history. That, of course, the people who study the things they have clear, but the general public they still have a very naive view of it. After the war, the Americans took over all the colonial world from the Germans and from the British because they pressed so that India was made independent and some of the African colonies, but it took that independency of the colonies in Africa quite a few years after the war. And in the meantime, they developed the atomic bomb. So really, they were the most powerful. The Russians still, they did not have a bomb at the time. It took them like 5 years more than the Americans to develop their own. So really, they created at the same time the system of banks and the financial system that they impose all over the world. They organized some conferences in the United States in a place called Bretton Woods, and they had representatives of 30 or 40 countries of the world, and they told, well, look, the new world order is going to be this. We will have the Bank of Development, the Bank of Reconstruction, the International Monetary Fund. The dollar will be the reserve currency of the world. So for all the important transactions, we will use the dollar. So they could print and print dollars. Nobody knew how many dollars were there. So really the general public in the world were buying the cost of inflation. And the Americans were just having a good time and spending like crazy the monies that other people were supporting and financing. And that has been more or less the story until recent days. And that hegemonic organization of the world required all the time to have new conflicts and new wars because the most important part of their economy was the military industrial complex. the fabrication and export of weapons and all heavy equipment related to that. And therefore, they kept wars running first in Korea, just in 1951. And in the end, they always lost all the wars, but of course, kill a lot of people. And in the end, they create changes in the geographic or in the divisions of countries. Korea got divided, then later on Vietnam, then Laos, Cambodia, that were an extension of the wars in Asia, and then they went on into the Middle East, and they started the conflicts, the revolutions in Iran, and all these type of things that continue until today. And because the interventions of Russia and China managed to cool down the conflicts in the Middle East, now they started with the war in Ukraine, trying to challenge, Russia in their own territory with group of Nazis that developed. There is always a minority in all the countries that are not happy with how things are. And then with the support of the Americans, they organized this present conflict. And so it's unstoppable. But the result of all this is that the world has become aware of that, and they want to move away from the monopoly of the monopolar world. At one point, the Russians said, "Well, we don't want to continue in this Cold War," and they dissolved the Communist Party and they created a social democratic, a parliamentary system. But the Americans continue trying to carve out parts of the former Russian Federation, and they created problems in Georgia and problems in other former republics, and in Ukraine, of course. And that has been ongoing. So at the moment, really, China, that also has been challenged in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, continuously. They are always trying to what they call to limit, to stop, to to challenge the growth of new powers or new countries that they are very successful, because China hasn't been supported in any way by international banks or anything else, but yet China has created an incredible development. They have developed their own wealth, they have a massive population, and at the moment they are competing with the United States like equals. And so they are confronting China, they are confronting Russia, because they know that if other big powers or alliance of countries meet together, they will become a minority, and they have lost their influence and clout in the world today. And that's why they are moving away. These countries of BRICS that Julius was mentioning is association of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This constitutes the original BRICS. But now more than 40 countries in all the continents have requested to be part of BRICS. And really, you find that a shift is taking place in the geopolitical balance of the world as we knew it, and it has remained the same since the Second World War, since 1945, because the traditional powers were defeated and completely weakened up. So American came as the one taking over and formed the military organization of NATO, and all the rest is lots of interesting things. But that has had lots of repercussions for us. We as Latin Americans, we had constant revolutions in Latin America where every time that a central orientation or leftist government came into power, they organized a revolution and they took them down. That happened in Chile with a dictator called Pinochet, who stayed 17 years in power and was ferocious, was a Nazi government. And only the richest people and the elites survived that type of thing, financially and all the rest of it. And the big majority of people suffered a lot, and they had to emigrate, etc. I had gone out to form the movement, the humanist movement in Peru, and after that in Venezuela. So I was not there during the military coup, but my eldest brother was arrested. He was not a leftist, a furious leftist, but no, he was a member of the humanist movement, and they kept him in jail like for 6 months. And only pressures by my family and other type of things, after 3 or 4 months, because he had a double nationality, they allow him to go to Argentina. But like that, lots of people and members of the movement at the time that we were preaching non-violence, still they were arrested and sent them to concentration camps. So really, we know firsthand the relationship with the empire, with the American, with the colonial states, because they do with Latin America up to our days the same things that the Europeans, the British, and also the Americans do to Africa. They impoverish the majority of the population and they take away through the corporations all the national resources. Chile is very rich in copper and in nitrates, and all the big people exploiting those resources are American companies, and so on and so forth. So it's a history of colonialism, and what is called these days is neo-colonialism, what we are facing. And that's why this organization is changing the balance of the world. And we think creating a multipolar world, that means where all countries are treated equally and the considerations of all countries are given similar importance. And we eliminate war absolutely as a means of resolving conflicts. And we enter in a new era of development where it is very important that people who are very poor have to be brought to the same level of the majority of the population of the countries in terms of education, in terms of fundamental human rights, in terms of quality of life, in terms of safety, of health, etc., etc. What is are all the things that we should be, all of us, to afford in this time and age? Because it's true that the world is technologically much more advanced, that we have lots of resources of education and well-being, and we have to share them with everyone. That is the vision of humanists, and that's why we feel sympathy for the BRICS. We are not involved in or supporting every political thing they do, but they think that we think that we are moving humanity in the right direction. It's in the same spirit. I don't want to take too long talking about this
Yes.
geopolitics, but since
No, I think
Julius
this is,
spoke about
yes,
BRICS,
I think this is very, very nice. And it gives a fantastic overview of the world. And in this world, that the World Humanist Forum Africa, and for that, other formations of the humanist forums in Asia, in
mm,
South America, in Europe, that
yeah,
this is the world we are in, and this is how
exactly,
we are leaning in support of like-minded forces that have
yes,
the final target of creating a world
mm,
that is by nations that are trying to live in a peaceful existence amongst them instead of constant wars, where
exactly,
we experience that there are robberies and and they are using the resources of other nations to fill in with theirs.
to buy guns and weapons and to kill people, those resources should go to the development of
Yeah,
infrastructure,
yeah,
education, and all the fundamental needs of people everywhere.
yes. And the contribution of, as I said, the Siloist contribution or humanist contribution would be to, very much could be under the heading of education,
Yes,
to understand who are we, how is it that we are violent, and how can we work from inside of us on our uh, fantastic, incredible potential as human beings to get rid of the causes of the violence.
exactly. So that's
So,
our core thing, our core preoccupation as humanists, education. And
yeah,
education is to understand these ideas and be
yeah,
able to practice these ideas in your day-to-day life. So
yeah,
to
and
change the culture of humanity,
yeah,
the culture of violence.
I think I will choose if we can agree to end this on citation of what I remember Silo saying at one time. He said that a nation that is educated and healthy can squeeze water from stones. So this is like, this is the, and actually this is the working title of the Humanist Forum, that we are working with everyone that is going into the same direction. Only thing is that we do not want to work with forces that advocate violence or discrimination.
Exactly.
So that is what it is. So thank you very much, Antonio.
Well, my pleasure, and sorry to
No,
talk
it
so,
is
so
great.
much. I mean, I like to talk about these things, and I hope that
Yeah,
some of
no,
these
it's
things, I mean, give some sort of different viewpoints.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I look forward to meeting you next week.
yeah.
And
Thank
also,
you.
we are going to talk about these short seminars that we plan to organize for about 4 hours. That each one of you said in the previous meeting that you would implement conditions to do that, and
Yes,
so we
yes.
can talk about the content and how to implement the initial ones.
Yeah, I think we
Have a
should
great time.
organize such a meeting. Okay, peace,
Thank you.
pause, and joy
And joy
to you,
also to you.
and to all of yeah, and all the others.
Perfect, Julius.
So
Thank you very
thank.
much.
Yeah,
Take care.
now I will be careful
Yeah,
to take us out of the
yeah,
recording,
yeah.
and we go here, manage recording, and uh, we go here to stop recording and stop